1974 was a year of two general elections and regular industrial strife and strikes. And in the case of the February election, there was a direct link. It all started when the miners flexed their muscles. They had won a significant pay rise by striking 2 years previously, but at a time of high inflation, they still weren't getting what they thought they deserved. So the ballot boxes came out and the miners voted on whether they should strike.
Back in '74, we had people leaving our industry to go and work in factories, to work in biscuit factories, to work in Baglan Bay. We couldn't survive like that. All the craftsmen were leaving. It was so important we had the basic wage that encouraged people to come back into mining.
And so the mines fell idle and the pickets went out to try to stop coal supplies from reaching power stations. As customers had to queue up for their bags of coal, the patience of the Conservative Prime Minister, Edward Heath, was running short, and he called an election.
And all of a sudden, here was Ted Heath saying, do you want the miners to run the country, or do you want Ted Heath and the Tories to run the country? I mean, I could never understand why Ted Heath went to the elections. I couldn't believe it. I mean, the lights hadn't gone out. We hadn't been on strike a couple of weeks. So we found that incredible. I didn't want Ted to go. Stay, Ted. Don't go, don't go for elections. Stay with us.
And so the politicians hit the election trail. Throughout February, they were out pounding the streets, kissing babies and shaking hands. One of the most vigorous campaigns took place in Carmarthen, where the Plaid Cymru president, Gwynoro, put on a strong challenge against the sitting Labour MP, Gwynoro Jones.
These days, it's all national politics, or all UK politics. In the 70s, there were issues of a local level, and they were more important. You know, people of Carmarthen were not worried whether Heath or Wilson won. Their real concern was about Gwynoro and Gwynoro Jones. So yes, it was about two people. Which one of these two men are we going to have as the MP for Carmarthen? Because after all, Carmarthen is far more important than any other constituency, isn't it? I knew I was in for a rough ride, I reckon. I knew that 3,000 majority on was going to disappear.
The campaign continued right up until election day, and Gwynoro's wife persevered right up until the close of the polls.
And she got 3 people out to vote about 5 to 9 in Carmarthen town, in their pyjamas. 2 ladies, I think, in their night dresses, and a man in his pyjamas and he put his coat on.
And when it came to the counting, every vote was critical.
So when the first declaration was announced, I had won by 10. 10, okay? Recount, of course. Gwynfor asked for a recount. The next recount, I had a majority of 4, I reckon. Something like that. So Gwynfor asked for another recount. Right? Now this time, he went ahead. I'm not quite sure what it was, but you know, you're talking single figures. Gwynfor went, so I asked for a recount. So anyway, at the end of the night, 5 o'clock in the morning, a halt was called. Anyway, the count started again, tea time on the Friday. And I think it ended up as a majority of, was it 1? Something like that, for Gwynfor. So I asked for another recount. And the returning officer said, well, this is the last count. We're going to count each candidate individually. I was second, because Gwynfor was ahead, right? Same vote as last time. Now I thought, there we are, you know, goodbye sort of thing, right? So they now proceeded to count Gwynfor's votes. And towards the end of his vote, a hand went up in the back of the hall, one of the counters, right? And I think in a bundle of 50 for Gwynfor, there were only 46 there. So his majority of 1 became my majority of 3.
Gwynoro Glyndwr Jones, 17,165.
I mean, elections these days are quite normal. You know, they have a count and they go home. But that wasn't like that in Carmarthen.
Despite losing 2 other seats in Wales to Plaid Cymru, Labour won the election, and their first job was to resolve the miners' strike on terms which were favourable to the miners.
And immediately they sat down with us and gave us one of the best offers we'd had for probably 15 years. That was the best increase we'd ever had.
As well as the miners' strike, there were other industrial disputes in 1974. A baker's strike meant there was no bread on shop shelves, which had jumbo consequences for some big eaters.
Rani and Rebecca, 2 of the 7 elephants who easily get outside something like 50 loaves of bread a day and 5 tons of expensive hay a week, they're double trouble. This was their last foreseeable ration.
Now we've got no bread for the elephants and the bears, so really we're really foraging for food.
Can you really expect much public sympathy, though, when housewives themselves are short of bread?
All I can say is that if anyone would like to just share their bread that they've got with some of our animals, then we'd be delighted to hear from you in Cardiff. What we plan to do today is we're going to try and go shopping with the elephants and see if we can persuade some of the local bakers to give us some bread for the elephants.
Well, maybe it was a blatant publicity stunt, but it worked. Another industrial dispute in 1974 that created suffering for some customers was the brewers' strike. Within a week of the workers walking out, the pubs began to run dry, but the strike continued for another 7 weeks. The dispute took an unusual turn when the workers' wives got involved in putting extra pressure on their husbands, as Graham Thomas, the shop steward, remembers.
The wives were as frustrated as we are, and when they found out the union was going to have a talk with the management without us being present, they took umbrage. They got down and done all their placards, and the wives turned out in mass.
The men paid their union. What did they get out of it? Nothing. The union are not behind them.
They were a bit frightening, they were.
So you're behind your men even if they turn down the latest offer?
Well, if my husband goes back to work with his tail between his legs, I leave him.
Fortunately, they didn't have to carry out the threat, because within a short period of time, we've got the pay rise. We'd also got a lot of back pay, which we earned, and the wives were more than happy.
This was an era in which campaigners were willing to go to the barricades to make their point. The people of Hirwaun were up in arms at the proposals of the Gas Board to locate a massive gas storage facility on their doorstep. And so they protested.
The problem was they were going to build, I suppose, 2 great big gas tanks capable of supplying the whole of South Wales with gas for 5 days, fairly close to the village.
As well as marching on Cardiff and organising cavalcades of cars through valley towns, the campaigners mounted a permanent protest on the site.
On a daily basis, we normally kept not more than a dozen people picketing. But of course, we could increase the size of the picket at any point in time. For example, the South Wales NUM had already said that they would bring out 30,000 Welsh miners if Wales Gas tried to enter the site.
Indeed, things did come to a head in April when Wales Gas tried to get onto the site to start work.
And we knew when something was going to happen, when the friendly policemen who were offered tea and biscuits in the hut were taken off and the tough squad came on, and then we knew something was about to happen. I think we ended up with in the region of 5,000 people on the site, and that stopped them dead. Not the police couldn't cope with us, nothing could happen, so they just gave up and went away. And that was the final attempt by Wales Gas to enter the site.
I think we're much more of a community now after this action.
In what way has this action affected village life?
Well, we know each other far better. People who've come up here picketing, now instead of acknowledging people on the street as almost strangers, they know them very well. We've come together, we're a community.
Another locality to benefit in 1974 was West Glamorgan, the first area in Wales to get its own local radio station. Swansea Sound opened in September to much anticipation.
And you're in line with Drive Time, where you're travelling home from work. It's certainly in style. You're always travelling.
We were the first in many ways because we had nowhere to look to find a replica, and we were first bilingual station, and the first one to be funded entirely with local money. The first one, which was to have its own studios. We were mad enough to go and build our own studios, and it was young, it was vibrant, and it was new. Meant to give Swansea the radio service which we thought it needed and in fact was asking for.
We think we've got something for everyone. Certainly that's our objective, you know. We change tempo rapidly. We start off with bright pop music, lots of news as it happens. We move through the day then, changing for the housewife at home. But basically, I think everyone will find something worth listening to on Swansea Sound. Yeah?
Before very long, we had a 44% share of all radio listening in the broadcast area.
It's Gallagher and Lyle and Song and Dance Man.
What do you like about it?
Well, all programmes.
The pop?
Yeah, it's on from the time it starts till the television comes on tea time.
I quite like it,
It's around Swansea, isn't it? You know, you hear people that you know.
I like the news spots in it, the 2020 news. I think that's very good.
Swansea City Council may supply plastic bags for refuse collection to 10,000 more city homes. This follows the success of a pilot scheme involving 350 homes.
Today, it's changed. It's changed. I mean, I think it's sad that you can hear the same radio programmes simultaneously in Birmingham, London and Cardiff. And, you know, somehow the local radio, which was the missing ingredient, it was the ingredient we were looking to put into the radio service in South Wales, that this has become rather lost along the way.
I'll take a break and I'll be back in just a moment.
Back in 1974, only segments of the M4 had been built, but the motorway was marching relentlessly on. This was bad news for one village on the edge of Port Talbot. Groes was a pretty settlement of a few dozen houses and a unique round chapel, but its days were numbered.
In 1974, we heard that the M4 was going to come through Margam. Well, we were delighted with that news because the traffic at that time going through Margam was terrific. You couldn't cross the road. But of course, we were all hoping it was going to be a coastal road. But we were devastated when the government decided it was going to go through Groes village.
In a few months' time, the bulldozers will smash their way in, and soon the juggernauts will be thundering over the site as if the community had never existed.
It's really disgusting. It's really upset me. The inquiry was nothing but a farce from the beginning because they knew they wanted to demolish Groes and they carried on with it and they intend to do it, irrespective of our feelings.
Well, I don't want to leave Groes. This has been my home. Number 2 has been my home for the last 46 years.
Well, it was devastating. And nothing, no petitions, letters, phone calls, nothing would make them change their mind. Those lovely little cottages had to come down, the school, and the only thing that could be saved was the chapel because it was listed. They had to move it somewhere, and they wanted to move it to St. Fagans or Margam Park. Well, that would be no good at all to the members. So the fight was on to try and get the chapel moved to Margam.
Fortunately, a new site was found for the chapel, a short walk away from its original location.
Every stone now was taken down and marked for them to know how to put them back. And they said it'll be put back exactly like it was, about 500 yards from where it used to be. We'd never believed that it would be put back the way it was, but we were very surprised, nicely surprised.
One consequence of the easier travel through Wales was a boost to tourism in rural areas. Attractions which had previously been too far off the beaten track were now sprucing themselves up and preparing for an onslaught of tourists. One of these was the complex of caves at Danar Ogof.
I think that's when tourism in Wales really got going. Certainly here, things were very primitive in those days. It would have been a very small restaurant, an even smaller car park, and a huge ice cream kiosk, because that's really what people enjoyed about a day out. So that really was our start, and of course with the coming of the M4 motorway, we noticed a tremendous increase, especially in English visitors. They'd actually come from England to us in a day, and we thought that really brave of them. You know, that was a tremendous journey.
Now he's the manager of the site, but back in '74, Ashford's job was much more hands-on.
Yes, back in those days I was a guide, so that was a lovely job. We used to do, every guide used to do about 8 trips a day. And of course a guide was essential in those days because I carried all the safety equipment, which really was a couple of candles and a box of matches. Nowadays it's all computerized. You go round, you go through a beam, it turns on the commentary. That side of it has all changed, and my job now is far more meeting the people before they actually get into the caves.
While visitors from England turned their attention towards mid-Wales, the farmers of North Wales turned their eyes towards Brussels. Having just joined the EEC, livestock producers found that their subsidies had been stopped overnight, so they took to blockading the ports.
Back in '74, it was the first time I've ever been on a protest. Well, we decided that, we had to do something. And of course, Holyhead was the obvious target because cattle were coming from Ireland and they were shipping cattle through the UK to other parts of Europe. So we decided as a protest that the best thing that could be done was to block Holyhead. The first night we had no problem at all. The local police were caught unaware. We created havoc in the port at the time.
We don't want anybody hurt.
But of course, after that, they had to bring in reinforcement, what we call today the riot police, and they had no sympathy at all, and they didn't understand what was going on. All they were told is to control those farmers. And I still can see the sea full of policemen helmets because farmers started to grab the helmets and just throw them into the sea, and they were bobbling about all over the place. But, it drew attention to the problem, and, I'm not saying that's the way every time, but it does work sometimes.
The action won the farmers a concession from the government. And success was a fact of life for the Welsh rugby team in the mid-'70s, with many of the players having the honour of being selected for the British Lions tour, including the mercurial fly half Phil Bennett.
My first Lions tour in 1974 to South Africa, and it was back in the old amateur days. In those days, 3.5 months, a very, very long tour, 22 games, and it was a great experience to go to a country like South Africa. When we left, I must be honest, I never would have dreamt that we were going to win the whole series 3-0 and come back undefeated. So it was a very happy tour. You have to admit as well that some of the star players on the tour were Welshmen. I believe that Gareth Edwards, who's generally regarded as probably one of the best players in the history of the game, had his finest ever rugby tour, his finest ever period as a player. He was outstanding. JJ on the wing. They talk about great wingers. This guy scores tries galore on this tour, is lightning fast.
J.J. Williams, first try, clinched the match and the series.
Bobby wins it up front to hooker. I think he fought every South African out in South Africa, on and off the field, Bobby. He was a great, great man. He was the character of the tour. So yes, it was a British tour. We all were together as one. But you have to say as well that the Welsh boys did very, very well on the field. I could not believe when I got home to Heathrow at the end of the tour, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of supporters who travelled down from Wales, from all over Great Britain to meet us at Heathrow. But for me, the greatest thing that I will always remember from that tour, I got home Monday to my little terrace house in Benivore about 5 o'clock, exhausted, and I said to my wife, well, let's just relax. And she said, I've got something to tell you. The village have arranged a bit of a parade for you. They're going to take you in a horse and cart around the village. And I thought, oh God, you know. But when I went there, I can never forget it. The streets were packed. We went to the local village park where I played as a young boy, 5, 6, 7 years of age. And here I was, now perhaps 3,000 or 4,000 people there, welcoming me back home, saying thank you for winning out in South Africa, presenting me with a nice gift on the stage, which I could not believe. I thought, emotionally, I was completely overtaken by it all. And I remember going back to the rugby club where I had my first pint of shandy, possibly, and saying, well, it's been a long trip, it's Monday, I'm exhausted, I'll have a couple of beers and call it a night. And I think I left at about 3 o'clock in the morning, singing again as if I was back on tour again. But that welcome home will live with me forever, ever and a day.
Another Welsh person on top of the world in this year was Helen Morgan from Barry, crowned Miss World. Unfortunately, only 4 days into her reign, she was forced to resign when the press whipped up a storm about the fact that she was an unmarried mother. But back home, she found support and understanding from the people of her hometown.
When I returned to Wales on Friday evening, I was absolutely hit by a massive sympathy and letters that were wondering why I gave up the title.
I mean, I think the fact that she's had a baby and kept her figure and it looks like it's a compliment to her. She won it fair and square, and I think she's entitled to the crown.
I thought she was just a lovely girl. I didn't think of her morals or what have you.
What's wrong with being unmarried nowadays?
Well, this is nature, see?
And talking of contests, there was another opportunity for the good people of Carmarthen to state their preference for Gwynoro Jones or Gwynfor Evans when another general election was called just 8 months after the previous one. Come election night, the eyes of Wales were on this key constituency, and HTV's man on the spot was Mike Lloyd-Williams.
Good evening from Britain's most marginal seat of all, and by the time we hope to say good morning again to you, we and the large crowd here around St. Peter's Civic Hall in Carmarthen hope to be in a position to say who's in that seat for the foreseeable future. But as the ballot boxes keep on arriving here, let's remember first of all what happened last time.
In that particular occasion, I don't think they were aware that I was trying to talk to somebody way up in the sky, as it were.
But will this event be another February filibuster? Who goes home and who will get edged out this time? Well, somewhere in that mountain of ballot papers lies the answer.
Well, you have to keep gabbling, don't you, whatever, and you gabble off and you gabble on, and you just hope that nobody knocks you flying, because even if they do, you've got to get up.
And what about the latest betting today in Carmarthen? And this is a town that likes a glass and the occasional wager and a good quarrel. The betting makes Gwynfor 4-1 on favourite still.
When I mentioned drink, you know, I mean, it was a happy crowd, which grew and grew. But a jest could have turned into a jostle. A jostle could have turned into a love pat across the nose. And God knows what might have happened. But dear Vid Fisher, being a great man of choral music, he not so much diffused a situation, but prevented any kind of ugliness developing whatsoever.
But in the middle of all these strong feelings, what the vision I remember is of Viv Fisher trying to keep both sets of supporters happy, as if they were, you know, as if they were in a rugby game, you know, and he was leading them in community singing. Oh, unbelievable. You know, you don't get things like that now. And once we were in the count, you could hear this. The thousands of people outside singing, you know, Hen Radford Hadai, or Imo Mis in Ffyddlon, or Cwm Rhondda, or Guide, or whatever it was. You know, from it. It was amazing, amazing times.
In the end, Gwynfor Evans' supporters were in better voice as he won back the seat that he'd originally taken in 1966, the culmination of a memorable year for the people of Wales. Remember, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time when we'll be looking at the events of 1978.